I've always wanted to be an actor ever since I was 6 years old. And the lack of seeing myself reflected did impact me in the way that I thought, is this for me? Because that's the message, even if it's not an intentional message, that is put across is this really for you?
Welcome to The Wheelchair Activist, a podcast hosted by me, Emma Vogelman, and every month I interview amazing members and allies of the disabled community who are quite literally changing the world. In this episode of The Wheelchair Activist, I interview Zak Ford-Williams. Zak is an actor who performs both on stage and on screen, having trained at the Manchester School of Theatre. But you might recognize him from the most recent series of Bridgerton on Netflix. I had such a wonderful conversation with Zak about disability representation in acting, disability in the media, and so much more. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Well, Zak, thank you so much for joining us on The Wheelchair Activist. And for those of our listeners who are not watching this on YouTube, where might people recognize you from?
So I was on the latest series of Bridgerton. I played a character called Lord Remington, and there's some British television stuff that people might recognize me if they're into watching that. Things like BBC's Better and Midsomer Murders, but Bridgerton's the sort of first American project I've done, so it was fun for that. An American audience may know me primarily for that.
And I have to admit, it was after seeing you on Bridgerton that I thought I desperately want to have you on the podcast to talk about not just the most popular show on Netflix, absolutely not a big deal, but also about being a disabled actor in that
Mm,
space. And I think particularly in Bridgerton, I think it's one of those shows that very rightly we think about with diversity. We think about the incredible range of people that they portray on the
mm,
show. And it was really, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel it was really only this season that
mm.
disability started being covered.
Yeah, as far as I know, and that's really interesting to me because I'm a huge history nerd, and it's always been interesting with period dramas and their relationship with disability, because in the past there'd be far more disabled people, and there'd be far, healthcare was far worse. That people would be injured. There were a lot more wars and battles, and uh, people would often grow up, slightly malnourished, and that even with our sort of disabilities we have today, I think there would be a lot more of that and general wonkiness, I sort of like to call it. So I think I've always found it interesting when I don't see that reflected in period dramas, and everyone actually looks even more clean and more perfect and more, and it's
Mm.
interesting because it's sort of, to modern standards, it would be the other way around. So it was a delight to have this come through and to be there. And I particularly me as a history nerd, I particularly loved because I did a bit of research into it, sort of what it was it like being a disabled person at the time, and I looked into bath chairs, and then they brought that as they were called, wheelchairs at the time were called bath chairs, and they brought that to me, and I was delighted because that one we use in the program is not a recreation. It's an actual of the time bath chair.
I was
And
going to ask you about this, but I cannot believe that.
I was so excited. I just sort of sitting there, but I was sort of slightly cautious of it because it was like this beautiful old thing, and it was amazing, and I didn't want to break it, or it was like my baby for that period of time.
Do you,
Fantastic thing.
do you know
Yeah.
how old it was?
I think it was from the Regency. So,
Wow.
they really went all out, and it's a credit to them, and a credit to everybody who finds these things. I always find it on every program I work. It's almost, it's in the best possible way. I find it distracting in a good way when you look around and you look around at these sets and the costumes and the effort everyone puts into making everything just look so perfect. I come onto set and my breath is so taken away by what
Wow.
I'm seeing around me. At the and you can tell in every little, and it was like this on Bridgerton, in every little minute bit of detail that may even not be on camera, but just for tiny little moments have gone evenings and evenings and evenings of effort from
Wow.
everyone here. And it's really interesting because I'll have this moment of wow, and everyone else is like, yeah, so should we get going? And I'm like, oh yeah, right. Job. Working for it, and I can't just sit there and admire all these
Yeah.
things, but honestly, it's a credit. It's a credit to everyone, and it was so detailed and brilliant. And I've got no idea how they managed to source that bath chair,
I
but
mean, it was, I kid you not, it was something I wanted to raise specifically with you because I was looking at it and thought, okay, like this, it feels like it could be accurate, but I'm so glad though that you did do the research
mm,
into the time period because
yeah,
that sort of makes it feel more authentic. And I feel like we could sit and talk about Bridgerton in terms of the set design and
mm.
everything for absolutely ages because I love history as well, but I'm also a bit of an interior design and architecture
Mm,
person. So I saw the Architectural Digest video where the one of the main set designers goes through some of the different sets in Bridgerton and the attention to detail, like you mentioned, just this color is in this space, but now it's in that space, and it's
it's
so
extraordinary.
intentional.
Yeah, and it's the specificity on display because specificity counts for so
Mhm.
much. Because even if you don't consciously pick something up, your brain does. As a viewer, we go, if something's missing, we may not even consciously realize it, but we go, something's odd here. So they have to be so detailed and so specific. And it's amazing, honestly. It's magic what they do.
In your experience being on Bridgerton, which
Mm,
I know I'm so incredibly interested in, is what so we've talked about sort of the sets and the attention to detail of those and then the wheelchair itself, but as a disabled actor in
mm.
that space with now very famous people, but that aside, but other actors, how does it feel as a disabled actor in those spaces?
It's it's extraordinary. People were so lovely. There is, and it's not a negative thing. There is a cultural difference between, and you could sort of feel that between British attitudes towards disability and American attitudes. And it's not a better or worse thing. In America, the support's better, but it's also like the medical model is a bigger thing. And it's more sort of medicalized. And it's really interesting in the little interactions. And you can sort of feel that. And I find that really interesting. But people were really lovely. It's really funny because everyone wants to get everything right. And it's really nice because I'm just like, throw me in and do whatever. But everyone's
Yeah.
like, are we doing everything okay? Because most people are really nice and just will always want to get it right. And sometimes that can make people understandably very nervous, as happens with every single job. There is a bit of, particularly if someone's not growing up around disability, which is unfortunately the case in past generations where disabled people were segregated into different schools. If you haven't grown up around someone like us, that there can be that. And so
Yeah.
you got to kind of put them at ease. But it was really nice. And it was really interesting to sort of be in that environment because the amount of, while we're all sort of doing this, and putting on this sort of voice, the amount of people from all over the place with all sorts of different accents in their real lives and from different disciplines, and we're all sort of chatting and getting along, and I love
Yeah.
to hear about people and their path and their craft, and so that was a joy, and I found my experience of working there and working on set really nice. People were lovely.
Oh, that's so incredible to hear. But on the accent point, I was watching interviews with
Mm,
various members of the cast, and I can't remember her name now, but the actress who plays Eloise, when I heard her
mm.
speak in her normal speaking voice, I felt I'm so taken out
Yeah.
of the character because she couldn't sound more different. But in terms of, yeah, the America versus British sort of culture. I grew up in the US and then moved to the UK when I was 16, so I really get what you mean about the different ways that the different countries approach disability. But
Mm.
in terms of the acting industry in Britain, how have you felt in those spaces? You mentioned that Americans, they desperately want everyone to be happy all the time, even if it's just being American happy. But I do agree with you that there is this willingness to be like, is there anything more? Is there anything more?
Mm.
And I'm curious what British acting industry feels like for you.
It's really interesting because I went to drama school. I came through that route from a very theatrical background and sort of
You
classical
couldn't
training.
tell. Couldn't
It's
tell at all.
theatre, darling. But there's what I like, and I like about my career so far is the huge variety in it. And when you're doing a really intense play with a budget that's not so big, but is really there's much more. You get on and do everything yourself, and everyone sort of pitches in, and so it can be strange when you get to a set because I think sets. I think in the past maybe there was more of a difference, but I think British and American sets, maybe because of the prevalence of streaming and filming of American programs over here and sort of vice versa, it's all kind of homogenized, which is really interesting. But it's really interesting to go from sort of doing it yourself and getting that to people being lovely and basically waiting on your hand and foot and go, can I do anything? And I just sort of don't know how to respond to that in the nicest possible way because it's so new to me. And that is something I haven't quite gotten used to yet. And I don't know whether I want to get used to it. I don't know whether that, as nice as it's something I'd want to come to expect.
Yeah, yeah. For anyone who knows me, even remotely, I'm sure they're thinking Emma could get used to that real fast. And I probably could, but that's really interesting. But I do really hear what you mean about sort of those very different environments where it is sort of everyone muck in and do what you can for the sake or for the good of that final product.
Yeah. And there are so many people that usually it would be one person doing 4 different jobs, and the scale is terrifying. I
Yeah.
remember I love doing this, but I did have a moment because it was a night shoot and I'd, I just finished filming my first main role in a TV series, which was better, but I was still sort of new to the whole game and I was very intimidated by this massive set. And there was this moment of it being in the early hours of the morning and the camera was there. I was liking it to this massive mechanical monster. You're always expected to act naturally, and there's this beast there that feels like it's here.
Yeah.
And I had this moment of how did this happen? How did it get here? In the
Yeah.
nicest possible way. There was complete panic right before they said action. But that's always interesting. It's the scale and enormity and the because I like to try and learn everyone's names and get to know everyone. And I also realized that was on this sort of scale, probably quite impossible.
Yeah. Well, I bet when you look at the cast alone, it's a huge ensemble cast, although there are, of course, main characters in every series, and that changes, but there are the main cast members, but all of the crew and the writers and everyone who makes that incredibly opulent world because but even if it was somewhere very dingy or rural, which is quite different, there are still lots of people who need to make it look that way and make it look
Yeah.
authentically
Yeah.
that way because so this will not surprise you, but I also love period dramas. And I remember that there was something in the news at one point about a scene in Downton Abbey where you're able to see an overhead wire, and people were so outraged at that because it really took them out of the time period.
Yeah.
I have watched that episode so many times and I can't find it, but it's something that could be so incredibly small that someone's going to comment on. but
Mm,
particularly with a show like Bridgerton that is getting millions and
mm,
millions of watches. And
yeah,
there needs to be that amount of people
yeah.
making that world.
That's always something, and I think in the afterwards, because sometimes you do these filming jobs, and it can take a couple of years. So you go on, you get on with you do other jobs, and then it comes out, and particularly on looking at the scale of viewership of this series, when you see that hundreds of millions of people have probably seen your mug, it's amazing and lovely
Yeah,
and terrifying.
yeah, but I mean, I can only imagine as an actor that, that type of exposure. I mean,
Mm,
I hope it's like open doors for
mm,
you or gotten you on people's radar, which I know that we are definitely going to be talking about some of your upcoming projects as much as you're able to. But tell me about the process of getting to Bridgerton. What's the story before you're in that night scene, which I think is the one that I'm thinking of with Nicola
mm.
Coughlan, who, if we don't talk about before the end of this episode, I will cry. But tell me, how did you end up there?
I've been quite lucky. I went to the Manchester School of Theatre as my drama school, which was very classic and very theatrical. I loved because it was really hard and a proper thing of like craft, text is king, all of that stuff. And I graduated in 2020 of all years. So that was an
Oh,
interesting year
God.
to graduate. So it was a year of nothing. And it was this year of sitting at home, rubbing my temples, going, have I made a mistake here? And then afterwards, I did my first sort of theatre job. And then I, what's nice is that the industry's really starting to come around to disabled actors and starting to see it as the opportunity and the creative opportunity that I believe it is. And that means you get a lot of self tapes through. Sometimes you get tapes through where you're like, the only similarity between me and this character is the chair, and I'm not gonna get this because this is for like an old man. But you know what? I'm gonna give it a go. And so you get a lot of stuff through and a lot of different accents and whatever, and that was fun because sometimes you get a tape through and you're like, I've never done this accent before in my life, and they're like, can you do it this weekend for Monday? And you're like, sure.
Anything you want.
Yeah, anything you want. And I did Christmas Carol in Nottingham in London. I played Tiny Tim, which was really funny because it was a joke that I started, so it's fine. But given me youthful looks and everything, I did say that my entire professional career might well be me touring the country playing Tiny Tim in different productions of A Christmas Carol.
I
So it
kind of love that for you, though.
yeah, so it was really funny to actually do that role and others in a production of A Christmas Carol, which was fabulous. And everyone working on that was honestly, that was amazing. And then I did Wolfe, which was a Sky program where I played a serial killer, which was really interesting to do as my sort of first TV role. Um, and that was fun. And I'd never worked with a camera because none of my training had anything to do with like a camera or anything. So that was difficult. And then I did Better, BBC One, which was my first sort of main role, which was enormous fun. And while I was filming Better, I was staying in Leeds and I got COVID and I was really ill. And then I get this tape that's high. And I knew it was for Bridgerton. Can you record yourself? And I looked like I'd been dug out the grave. I'll be honest with
Oh,
you.
God.
But I was like, yeah, I'll give it a go. And I did me artist. And you know what? I got it. And I'm so proud that I managed to get Bridgerton whilst having COVID and looking so ill. Um,
Oh my God. So for people who don't know, what is getting a tape through? Is that a
oh yes.
request? Is that a request to
Mm.
film something or what is
Yeah.
that?
Sorry. So a sort of self-tape audition, which is how sort of most auditions go. Sometimes you'll meet in person, often as a second stage, but mostly they will send you a script and go, can you sort of learn it? They don't necessarily ask you strictly to learn it, but it's one of those unspoken rules.
And then do you have someone just say the other lines to you,
Yeah,
or
so
do they try to pick
mm,
bits of speech that's
mm.
just your character?
No, I'll have friends and family helping me film and everything.
Please call
It's
me the next time you need someone.
yeah. You sort of call people and ask people and let me know, and it finds someone and they read in the other lines, and then you do a few takes and you look all through and you go, I think this one's the best, or and you agonize over them, at least I do, and you send them off and hope for the best. And sometimes you hear back, and sometimes you don't, and sometimes you hear yes, and
Mm.
sometimes you hear no, and sometimes you hear nothing. And so but you just got to fire them out and try and forget. And for Bridgerton, I obviously really wanted to do it, but I thought my chances, particularly with how ill I looked, and I've never considered myself because everyone looks so beautiful in Bridgerton, and I didn't know if I fitted that standard. And I'm really happy with how they made me up because I think I look great. And then I looked in the mirror when they put the costumes and makeup on. And I was like, I wish I could do this at home. I wish I was talented enough.
Yeah.
This extraordinary talent from all these people doing this to do this myself. But no, it went well. But again, I'm still at the very, I would consider
Mm.
myself at the start of my career. So particularly a couple of years ago, and I'd only graduated in 2020, it was a terrifying thing, but fun, you know?
There's so much in there that I want to ask you about, but I think first thing is when you get through the opportunity to record for Bridgerton,
Mm.
does it say that they want a disabled actor, or does it say that this character is disabled?
I don't know that. I imagine it's strange because sometimes they say and sometimes they don't. And sometimes it's clear that this character is written as disabled and sometimes it's not. For this, they didn't. But things are in such a way in this industry, and because I'm at the moment not a name, where I can sort of, if they're coming to me, it's likely that they're looking for a disabled
Okay.
um, actor. But I don't know in this case because it didn't say.
That's even more sort of interesting to me
Mm,
because if they're able to cast people based on what they bring to the character, and then, I mean, in your case with Lord Remington, his disability was never
mm,
outright mentioned, but he was a suitor, a potential suitor of Penelope,
mm,
and there's so much about Bridgerton, I think particularly that this season did particularly well, is not
yeah,
addressing
yeah.
things that don't need to be addressed anymore.
I'm big on incidental portrayal. It's very important to have disabled roles for disabled actors, but one thing I'm trying to push in my sort of career is to have characters who are not necessarily written as disabled. Sometimes just as a person, disabled actor
Yeah,
can play them, and it just incidentally has a disabled person, and that really is one thing I think this role and others in this series did wonderfully was that incidental portrayal. The other stuff that written as is crucial as well, but that it can just exist and it not be a thing is very Bridgerton, actually, in the way it does other diversity as well.
yeah,
And something I think it does brilliantly for that reason.
I completely agree with you though. I feel like I notice disability in films, TV, whatever it might be, so much more positively when it
Mm.
isn't a thing, when it isn't the entire point of the character, when it's, not, yeah, I appreciate that and there should be storylines about disabled people in our lives. And of course, disability plays a part in our lives. But like you say, those sort of incidental portrayals are really important. And I feel like I respond better to those as a disabled viewer. I've seen it in, I don't know if you watch Vera, but it's the sort of a murder mystery with Brenda Blethyn, who I think is great. But she always has someone in her team who is disabled, and then when
Yeah.
one cast member left, another disabled cast member joined as another person on her team, and
Mm.
so but again, it wasn't the point of the character, and I thought,
Mm.
that's a bit odd that you've just replaced one disability for another, but okay. But I think it is so important when someone just happens to be a realtor and
Yeah.
they happen to have a limb difference or whatever it might be. They're just there because, believe it or not, disabled people are just sometimes there.
Yeah, we just exist. And I think people's like a perception of that, not maybe I'm getting too woo, but I think perhaps segregated school system and things
Yeah,
are to blame a bit for that. Is that because of how things were done and maybe still are, understandably, some people have grown up when that isn't the case and they don't see disabled people around because they're sort of kept in their, own little space and own little bubbles. So it's society reflects media and media reflects society. And it's so important for us to do that incidental because it even subconsciously shows people and shows young people, very young people. One thing I've always wanted to be an actor ever since I was 6 years old, and the lack of seeing myself reflected did impact me in the way that I thought, is this for me? Because that's the message, even if it's not an intentional message, that is put across is this really for you?
yeah,
Because is this really for people like you? Are you allowed in this space? And my own belligerence. I found a few people. I idolized a few characters. Davros is a beloved one for me. Um, um, a disabled icon, and technically dead, but also disabled. But it's so important. It's so important because it helps normalize it in people's brains, not just as an entertainment thing, but in their everyday lives.
yeah. I completely agree that all instances of portrayal are important. We do need disabled stories out there, authentic ones, not
Mm,
unhelpful ones. And I'm curious your take on this because I have a real interest in when projects like film or TV will choose to use disabled actors and when they won't. And
mm,
I previously have and want to do again a TikTok series where I look at different portrayals of disability in the media. And part of sort of what I'm looking for is, was this played
mm,
by a disabled actor or not? And that really does impact the authenticity of
mm,
the portrayal. I think in a lot of cases, I think there are certainly instances where I can understand to an extent, particularly if it's someone who may have a progressive conditions. They need to be able to do something one minute and then not the next.
mm.
But I'm wondering what your take is as a disabled actor on disabled actors playing disabled people, if you feel that matters. And then on the other side of that, do you feel as an actor that you can only go for roles that say it's a disabled character? Do you feel like that's a safer bet? I'm
Mm.
aware those are two huge questions, but I think let's start with the disabled actors playing disabled characters question.
The two brilliant questions. It's really interesting because I do believe there is a grey area. I think in most cases, I think a non-disabled actor playing a disabled role is not okay. But I think you're right about things like if it's progressive and we have to say, I think that becomes more understandable. And and there are extenuating circumstances and anomalies, but I think for me, that's what it is. It's when it's an anomaly or a
Mm,
specific circumstance. When you see just a role that is specifically written and important as a disabled role and crucial to the disabled experience, and it can feel like a mockery is being broadcast. But I don't know whether you feel that, but it can be disheartening to watch that happen,
mm,
to watch someone who doesn't really understand it do their best work as an actor and trying to, and watching a lot of non-disabled people around it applaud it, even though in your mind it
yeah.
didn't feel authentic. Is a struggle. And I think that's the issue of why is because it limits creativity. I think we have a unique perspective on the world that non-disabled people don't, and the more voices and people on a creative project from different backgrounds, of different everything, the more life it can bring and the more interest it can bring to a story or characters. And I think it's such a missed opportunity when that happens. There have been so many. I've worked with some wonderful people, and there've been so many instances where me, as an actor, I've been playing a disabled role, and I've gone, "Oh, this bit doesn't make sense," because of the logistics of that. And I've had people around me go,
Okay.
"Oh, right, yeah." And I wonder if it misses things like that kind of voice, and it ends up feeling or inauthentic,
Mm,
or they do the thing. And this does upset me when the assumptions are the death of like any proper acting or actors. Assumptions can be so dangerous as an actor when you are playing something quite different from yourself, and you make very quick, immediate assumptions about that, and people assume our lives are all sad and miserable and everything, and it is a bit insulting.
yeah.
And I don't want to have a go at actors there, because we all have bills to pay, and we take the jobs we're offered and we're given, and
Yeah.
we all have to work. But I think the blame lies there with the people who pushed that and made those decisions to begin with to get that,
Yeah.
you know?
I I think there was something in what you said there about the creative project,
Mm,
and to get it authentic, it can't just be left to you coming in to make a character. Obviously, you are disabled. There's a level of authenticity to that.
mm,
But if your script has been written by by someone who makes those assumptions,
mm,
then there's only so much you can do, and only so much that your presence in that project can bring. You need disabled writers, directors, producers, all of those
mm.
aspects
A
to make it really
1,000%.
authentic.
I'm in such agreement. I almost can't shut up.
Yeah.
1,000%. You're absolutely on the money there, Emma.
It it was something that I don't know if you're a fan of Only Murders in the Building.
I've heard of it, but I've not seen it myself.
So there's a deaf character and deaf actor, and
Mm,
this isn't giving anything away, but there's a scene with this character and Selena Gomez, and she says something along the lines of, "Oh, I thought all deaf people were really great at lip reading. Like it in the movies, it always seems like you guys can just lip
mm,
read perfectly." And he responds by saying, "There aren't a lot of deaf people who write movies," or something along those lines. And it's
mm,
like, well, yeah, if you don't, you need that
yeah,
representation at every level
mm,
of the project. But I suppose then your job, if that hasn't been there, if that disability hasn't been represented up until you, then you're the face of it. You're the
mm,
face of that way that this one program portrays disability. And that feels like a very big responsibility.
I always say, because I don't like to portray myself as an expert on anything, or an expert on disability, and I tend to distrust people that do say that about themselves, because disability is so huge. Disability and neurodiversity is so massive and so all-encompassing. It's almost a big of an umbrella term that I cannot speak for anyone but myself. Even other people with cerebral palsy have cerebral palsy in
Yeah.
different ways and have different sort of experiences. Even then, I can only talk about myself. It's again one of those lovely things, is you get people coming to you and go, "Are we doing this right? Are we doing this right?" And I have to go, "Oh God, no, I'm not just an actor on this project, I'm a consultant, and I don't get double the fate." I actually
Yeah, I
but
was about to say that. If you're meant to act as that, then you should be paid accordingly. It's like, when you watch a legal drama or a medical drama, it'll say medical consultant, or there'll be some sort of title for someone who is in that field, who has checked it for accuracy. And
yeah.
but they're paid to do that. They're not paid to act and then also do that.
Mm. And because it is lovely, because it's not out of any like malice or ill intent, because people just genuinely want to get it right. And it's lovely to be asked those questions, but sometimes I have to go, I don't know. It looks fine to me, and I don't think
Yeah.
anyone will have a problem with it. But honestly, I don't know because I can only speak from my experience. And
Yeah, I mean,
I,
in the UK alone, there's 16 million
yeah,
disabled people. When you're branching into the States, I don't know how many there are there, but it's astronomical. One
yeah.
in four people have a disability.
It can be very hard because there are still so few of us in this industry. Is when intentionally or otherwise we are treated as figureheads. And sometimes and some of my friends and colleagues I know that are the same can feel this sort of pressure because you want to get it right and you think back to when you were little and you saw plays or TV or film and you want to make it right for them for the next generation. There's hopefully a lot more of, and you can show them, look, you are allowed in this space. It is okay, this
Mm,
space is for people like us, and that's is tricky, fun, and amazing, and it gets me quite emotional. I
mm,
one thing I did get and always gets me after every project is sometimes I'll get a message like on social media or someone will message me. It's so amazing to see someone like us. And every time it makes me cry. Because I'm an emotional, yeah, I'm soppy. But it really impresses on me the importance of people like us in creative industries seeing that because it is still so rare. And sometimes when I'm doing my job, I forget how rare it is because I'm doing it, and then I get messaged. And I don't quite know how to respond, and I find it very
mm.
touching, you know?
I think being that person that you didn't have when you
Mm.
were
Yeah.
a 6-year-old who wanted to be an actor is incredibly profound.
Yeah.
And I think as we've been talking, one of the things that I've been wanting to ask you about is specifically, you've said that you love history, and we started this conversation with you telling me, well, actually, there'd be more disabled people
Mm.
at that time. Never occurred to me. And but what one thing I was so interested in talking to you about is being an actor in period pieces because disability was so different, and I've barely seen that other than things like The Secret Garden and
Yeah.
things like that. But what does that do for you? What does that feel like for you to do roles like that, where I think disabled people are even less likely to
Mm.
appear? You
Yeah.
expect to see a disabled person casualty or something. I've never watched Casualty, but somewhere like that, but not in a period drama.
Mm. It is weirdly enough, most of my professional work so far has been period pieces in one form or another.
Yeah.
There must just be something of the past my face evokes. It's really every single time I love going back into the history, if it's a sort of different period or whether it's Bridgerton or I can talk about it now because it's been announced, or the Hardacres, which I think is coming out later this year, which is a period drama I'm in and very proud of. Um, and I play someone who has cerebral palsy, or at the time it was known as Little's disease, and I did a lot of research into how it presented at the time. Same condition, different name, and what I would have looked like without physiotherapy or surgery.
Oh, of
um,
course.
because my disability would look and my physicality would be entirely different. So I really enjoyed doing that. And when I played Joseph Merrick in a version of The Elephant Man called The Real and Imagined History of the Elephant Man on stage this year, and looking into the history of that, all these different kinds of things. It's something, it's really interesting how sort of massive it was in all of this history, and yet how it's odd because particularly what's fun about Bridgerton is that among the working classes, because it was so commonplace, because work was very dangerous for one thing, and people got injured all the time, sometimes grievously. And were often malnourished, particularly in sort of
Yeah.
in the Victorian era. People were just disabled, and it wasn't a big thing. And the differences between perception of being disabled as a working class person and being disabled as an upper class person, where it suddenly becomes a bit of a shame thing. And it's suddenly like
Wow.
something nobody really mentions, and you're suddenly kept inside more. And that dichotomy is quite interesting. I could go on.
Please do, because I think Lord Remington,
Mm,
that's very upper class.
yeah.
So did that surprise you then that he is just at these big society events? Like, did
Mm.
that feel incongruous to the time?
No, it's strange because it's like there is it is slightly awkward, but at the same time, it's like, well, I'm rich and I'm powerful and I'm influential, and do you want to, do you want to mess with me? It's like, a lot of, I think, when people in power who haven't grown up disabled but get things like age-related disability and become disabled, they still have that power. They still retain that money and
Mm,
influence. And I think there's a lot of that in sort of Lord Remington and maybe his family and himself. But it's like the aspects of his class trump any awkwardness. And I found that very interesting and very interesting to play with. Of someone who was like,
yeah.
yeah, I belong here. And are you gonna say anything?
Because with Lord Remington, he's not just there, but he's very outgoing. Is the way that he interacts in both really the hot air balloon moments, but then also in the ball with Penelope. And you're
Mm.
so brazen about, oh, I love Whistledown. It's a very strong character,
Oh
I
yeah.
think, in lots of different ways.
Mm. I loved that, and I took it such joy in finding that uniqueness about him and playfulness. Because one thing, and I think you'll get this and that really rang true in terms of the disabled experience is the people watching, because we often spend a lot of time sort of sedentary and sat down and watching, is this observance. And that combined with a sort of gossipy character who loves this thing and loves watching everyone and seeing what they can do, and oh yeah, what might be going on over there. And
Oh my gosh. When you
I
put it that way, why didn't they think Remington was Whistledown?
I don't know. I don't
I'm
quite
just
want to get
saying
into
it's
that.
something that could have worked.
Mhm. But perhaps, it's the thing of perhaps he's too obvious. It's that.
True.
And I think I love how brazen and charming he is as well. I just, yeah, and it's still quite rare that we find disabled characters, I feel, as an actor, getting sort of all these scripts and that level of joyous and fun and cheeky, and have that little sort of element of chaos. And it was such a delight to play in because of that.
And I think I also want to touch on so Lord Remington is in the first half
Mm.
of this season. Do you, if you're allowed to say, if Remington will return, but do you feel that they should have given potentially more space to maybe to disabled characters generally? Because I don't want you to feel like, oh, well, I can't say, yeah, I'd love more me, but there was also a character who was a BSL. So
Brilliant.
that was really interesting. But
Mm.
should disability be even bigger, particularly in a show like Bridgerton, which is synonymous with this beautiful diversity.
Mm. Well, I think what they did was amazing. And for all projects, I always think more, 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 more. So yeah, I'm always gonna say that. I think it was brilliant, and I would for every project say, I'll always say, whether it's me or someone else, it's always great to have of
Mm.
one of us in there. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question in any way.
Yeah, no, I think it does. And I think it's a challenge to then the creators of Bridgerton for the next season because
You know,
they,
it depends whether they feel it works.
yeah.
I would hope, but you never know.
But I think that's what conversations like the one we're having about disability at that time, but also in period dramas is
Mm,
so important
yeah.
because I know that when I'm watching period programs and
Mm,
I will now start thinking, okay, they are this type of a person, they do this type of a job, so their physicality doesn't match up potentially, and they could have a disability representation in
Mm.
there. And I think that that's so interesting. And I am really, yeah, keen to, yeah, see you really lean in to your disability and to think about it in terms of what if I hadn't had this treatment? Because
Yeah.
there's people like me who were, it's, well, if I lived in that time and I had this condition, in all honesty, I'd not be here. But,
Mhm.
for people for whom that isn't the case, but you still had medical intervention. So
Yeah.
I'm so interested that you really lent into that.
Yeah. It was for another project and for this, because I watched videos of myself pre-surgeries. I was lucky enough to have recordings of how I moved before that and trying to sort of emulate that and find a
Wow.
version of that and what I get like when I haven't done enough stretching and all of that. I'm trying to emulate versions of that. I just think it's really important to see, and maybe it's every program, a variety of bodies, a variety of people, a variety. You know, it creates such colorful, interesting art, and at least this is me. Is so much more interesting to watch when you see all sorts of people. I mean,
Yeah,
I
well,
also have my thing of period dramas. I also like my wooden teeth. I like my scabies. I want to see my wonky diseases and strange, ineffective medical treatments that are causing havoc as well. I like seeing all of that stuff. So there is also that element, which I appreciate in Bridgerton because that's not what they're going for there.
but like you said, I think the evidence for, why people should include different types of bodies and people
Mm.
is really Bridgerton. Like,
Yeah,
look, like you said, millions and millions of people watched it. And that's for a whole host of reasons.
yeah,
But diversity and representation is a big one.
massive.
It is huge. And, I think that for me, seeing disability in this season for me, that was really exciting because it was my representation for the
Mm.
first time in this show. So I think it's incredibly important and it's proven that's what people want to see.
Yeah. And because they do, I think there is an appetite for it and interest. I was quite taken aback, actually, by, because I'm not in all that many scenes and I just sort of pop in and people were doing loads about Lord Remington on social media and everything. And I found that really surprising and touching. And I think there is an appetite there for it and an interest. I think, particularly because so much is being made and so much is being created. People want the new, people want the fresh, like the interesting story ideas. They're very keen to like, what can we find that is
Yeah.
new? And I think in terms of a storytelling perspective, disabled life experience and neurodivergent life experience is an untapped resource of all sorts of things, of not just drama but comedy
Yeah.
and everything. And I do see it as that a gold vein that hasn't been found quite yet, and it's starting to be. People are starting to cotton on, but I think that is something an audiences will be interested by.
Yeah. I think anything based on true stories or an experience of someone I'm thinking particularly like World War II
Mm,
pieces. There's so much interest in untold stories from that time period, even though people, I think, will think about their history education and think, yeah, we covered that in extreme depth. So they're very familiar with the
mm,
time period, but then individual stories within time periods, I think, are what will really get people's interest. And I certainly find them really interesting. So, as a disabled actor, but also somebody who really loves history. I think my question on that is what stories have you come across
yeah,
of disabled people throughout history that you're like, yeah, someone should make a program or a
mm.
film about this?
I mean, it's really interesting because this has been done, and some would argue done to death. But the thing that really got me, because when I played Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man, we think about Joseph, even his name. In the film versions and everything that's based on the book, he's called John. And it was written by Sergeant Frederick Treves, who sort of, after Joseph's death, cast himself as the hero in Joseph's life and said, I was his best friend, his confidant, his savior, all of this stuff, which doesn't quite match up to the history. And he also got his name wrong. He called him John. His name was Joseph. But unfortunately, that book, as with a lot of male, white, upper class Victorian surgeons, their word is law, has
Yeah.
been taken as the de facto account of his life. And that was used for the original play and for the film and everything, which are wonderful. But what I find interesting, even something like that's like a legacy thing that people have done to death, what we try to do when we went back there is disregard this account that isn't from him. Just look at the historical facts and imagine what it is like for Joseph telling his own story. And I think there's a lot of things like that, of stories about disabled people that aren't necessarily accurate or emotionally authentic that we can explore. There are some good stuff. I'm a big fan of I Claudius. That comes to mind, and Dirk Jacobi and I Claudius, and that whole thing. People like Franz Kafka, who were disabled, all these sort of life stories and everything. And we shouldn't skirt around the fact they were disabled. I think it adds an interesting dimension that is it's a missed opportunity when it's not utilized. It's a missed opportunity for good drama, and all sorts of things, and authentic life experience. I haven't got my thoughts in order, but is any of this making sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And I think you're really right about a lot of perspectives from that time being told but through the lens of another person.
Mm,
And like with the Elephant Man, which I think is a incredibly interesting story, but I think sort of disability throughout history is something that I'm particularly interested in, and I will say this now, so then I will have to follow through and do it. But I'm hoping to do a mini series of this podcast where we look at disability in history, whether that's a particular disabled person that will do like a bit of a deep dive on, or if it's disability representation in a well-known period of time that people may not know about.
mm,
So I will say be on the lookout for that. But I think it's so interesting though when you get further back in history of people's inability to have documented their own stories. Stories were
yeah,
told through
yeah,
the white men or then the more educated and whatnot who were able to write down
mm,
their accounts. And there's so much I want to ask you about, but I think there's now I'm stumbling over my words because there are just so many aspects of what we've talked about. I think those are important, but I think getting real disabled stories or trying to retell stories like the Elephant Man with a more
mm,
intentional lens of a disability. And I will ask one more quick, two more quick questions before we wrap up. What has been your favorite portrayal of Richard III, which, as an actor, it's a Shakespearean part, it's huge,
mm,
but disability is also a huge part of not
yeah,
just the real man, but the text as well.
mm.
So I have to ask if you have a favorite.
I love Richard III. I'm completely obsessed with it. I've been obsessed with it since in drama school. I sort of I read it. I went into it expecting it to be ableist. And then when I read the play, I didn't find it to be ableist. I found the character and everything. It is Shakespeare and his genius. He always bloody does this. But it somehow feels authentic. It's just everyone else's reactions to him are ableist. And the trouble I can have with some stagings of Richard III is that because in the script he's charming and everything, and people call him these names and a bent back spider and all of that, but he's charming, he's suave, he's villainous and psychopathic, but he seduces a woman at her husband's funeral. He has something about him that is real, and I think the trouble is when Richard himself is portrayed as sort of, you know, it's that shortcut to villainy using a physical difference.
Yes.
As a look, he looks aesthetically what we would consider not nice, therefore he must be villainous. Is that by using that and him being like that, which I don't believe the script really and the play goes into. I think that's a creative decision that's been made and kept up in the years since by people who understand, strangely, or don't have quite as much creative empathy and imaginative empathy as Shakespeare did, that have then portrayed it in an ableist way. So, when Arthur Hughes played Richard III, and it's done by disabled people, I think it's terrific and adds so much more, because I believe that actor can get closer to understanding what it's like to be disabled in a way that I actually believe Shakespeare did.
Well, I was going to say Shakespeare mixed with all classes, and like you said, particularly the working class, and particularly those in poverty as well, would presumably have had a higher rate of disability, like you mentioned. So maybe, I don't know if that could have influenced it at all.
Yeah, I bet it. I mean, we'll never know. But this is the thing about disability being far more prevalent that we forget, because most of our perception of history is influenced so much by period drama that we forget that's the case.
Yes.
He will have come into contact with loads of disabled people. And also, the annoying thing about genius is, and in all aspects, is this just ability to imaginatively connect with things. And I believe, and because it's in all his plays with different kinds of people, is this uncanny ability to accurately imagine what it might be like to be in another person's shoes. So I think those two things combined make it feel like a really authentic play. I wish some of the stagings lived up to that creativity and imagination that Shakespeare displayed.
What a very diplomatic answer, but extremely thought-provoking. So thank you so much. And I'm aware I've taken up so much of your time, and we're recording this on a Friday evening. So we both clearly need to get out more, because we did not have other plans. But last question, I have to know, was Nicola Coughlan as nice as she appears to be?
So lovely. Honestly, so
Oh my
lovely.
gosh.
She was great. And really, really nice. So we had a proper good chat. Yeah, she was absolutely lovely. Exactly as lovely as you'd imagine.
That has made my week. I'm such a fan of her, and in the shows, I'm thrilled. But
It's brilliant.
I just want to say a huge thank you to you for coming on The Wheelchair Activist and telling me so much about your experiences of acting, but in Bridgerton as well. I've been so excited to have this chat with you, so thank you so much.
No, it's my pleasure, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Wheelchair Activist podcast. You can learn more and stay updated by going to my website, thewheelchairactivist.com, and following me on social media. We will be back next month with a brand new episode.